In 2008, the CEO of Canada's most ruthless criminal empire was locked away for life, but he didn't just break out. He orchestrated a masterpiece. 50 of his men staged a psychological war against the guards, buying him just enough time to vanish into the night. Brothers Richard and Danny Wolfe were born in the small Canadian town of Regina. Their parents were alcoholics and did not take much care of their children's upbringing. They drank away literally all the money that was in their pockets. So the brothers sometimes had to look for food somewhere outside the home because their parents simply didn't have any. At first, it was stealing from gardens and searching for food in garbage bins behind shops and restaurants. By the age of 12, the brothers had already been arrested more than 20 times for various reasons. They also went to school at the same time, but they had no success in their education, and their behavior was such that the teachers had to call the police a couple of times to calm down the naughty students. In 1988, the brothers joined a small street gang, Scampers Incorporated, which was involved in shoplifting and car theft. By the age of 12, the brothers had already been arrested more than 20 times for various reasons. They would gather in the basement of their mother's house, and there they would think about the name and concept of the future group. At first, the guys wanted to call themselves the Syndicate, but in the end, they chose Indian Post, or IP for short, which perfectly reflected the composition of their gang, which consisted of Indians. The concept of the Supreme Council was adopted from the first. This was a body of 50 of the gang's most authoritative members who governed the entire group, making decisions collectively. In prison, the groups were run by their most authoritative members who were serving their sentences at the time, thus creating a local council within the prison. The gang initially made money through theft. Initially, they stole cars, from which they stole forgotten valuables, radios, and hubcaps. Then, thefts from houses began. When the owners went away somewhere, they also stole everything that could be sold. The guys were caught a couple of times, but no one ever received a real sentence, only a suspended sentence. By 1990, the gang had added drug trafficking and pimping to its activities. The Wolfe brothers later used their classmates and their girlfriends as workers. As the scope of their illegal activities expanded, so did the gang's membership. By the mid-1990s, its membership totaled approximately 300 people of varying ranks. The goods for sale were most often purchased from local biker groups Los Bravos or Spartans. By the mid-1990s, IP had expanded its supply chain from bikers to Canada's west coast. Marijuana, cocaine, LSD, and hallucinogenic mushrooms were purchased there. The first full-scale special operation against IP was undertaken by the police in Winnipeg only in the fall of 1994. While in prison, they sold drugs, made friends with more experienced criminals, and recruited new members to their gang. While Richard wanted to quietly serve out his sentence and be released, Danny quickly earned a reputation as a fierce fighter and often took part in fights, including those for money. Richard was considered a diplomat who preferred to negotiate, while his brother had a reputation as a warrior. Before he turned 20, Danny had already participated in 14 shootouts. The exact number of people he killed remains unknown. In September 1994, Richard agreed to an interview for a newspaper where he revealed a lot of unnecessary information about the gang, thereby breaking one of the rules of the IP code: never talk about the gang's affairs with outsiders. By the age of 12, the brothers had already been arrested more than 20 times for various reasons. The gang members felt Richard had attracted too much unwanted attention to IP. A special meeting was convened right there in prison, where it was decided that Richard should be punished. And so he was beaten. But that wasn't all that marked 1994. In November 1994, the brothers were released. By then, they were personally earning between $15,000 and $30,000 a week. But again, in April 1995, Richard was arrested for drug trafficking, but was released before the trial began. And already in May of that year, he ended up in prison for attempted murder when he wounded Maciej Slawik, an immigrant from Poland who worked as a pizza delivery man at the Jumbo Pizza establishment, with a shotgun. The owner of this pizzeria also sold drugs and owed the brothers about $60,000 for the goods. Typically, the pizzeria owner would send one of his couriers with the money, who would bring the cash directly in a pizza box. Richard was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to 19.5 years in prison. He will serve his sentence at the maximum security Edmund Max Prison. This prison was considered one of the most severe in Canada, and many high-ranking IP members served their sentences there. They immediately reminded Richard of the interview he gave less than a year ago. Under pressure, Richard decided to leave the gang, seemingly agreeing with IP's advice, but almost immediately he was attacked. He suffered several stab wounds, but survived. After leaving the hospital, Richard received a letter from one of his friends on the outside, which said that the gang was waiting for a man to be transferred from a prison in Alberta to the prison, who would be supposed to kill Richard. When a busload of new inmates arrived at the prison, Richard identified the killer. He watched him for several days, then attacked him, stabbing him several times with a shank. As it turned out, Richard was wrong. The victim survived, and Wolf's sentence for the attack was extended by 2 years. While Richard tried to leave the gang, Denny devoted himself entirely to it. In prison, Denny organized drug smuggling. People from Volya connected with IP through tennis balls containing goods over the fence at a predetermined time. Denny picked them up and then distributed drugs in prison. He was released on parole on May 28, 1998, and immediately returned to business, despite a ban on associating with convicted criminals. Denny's friend, Angus, who worked in the Prince Albert area, was responsible for operations on the reservations. He was a local and had connections in the police, which made it easier for him to manage the delivery and distribution network. On average, drug trafficking on the reservations brought in up to $10,000 a week. Part of this money went toward paying dealers and purchasing new shipments, but even with expenses, the operation managed to earn around $300,000 a year. During this same period, prison IPs began to recruit members beyond the indigenous population. Inmates joined the gangs seeking protection, but even after leaving prison, they still remained a threat to the group. Denny was released on parole in 2004, but then violated his parole and was released again only in 2006. Now he was facing life imprisonment, which Denny decided to avoid by escaping from prison in Regina. Since his unit was located in an old building built back in 1915, he began digging in a blind spot that was not visible on CCTV cameras. He decided to dig a tunnel, which was ready by the end of August 2008. On the 24th, shortly after the evening roll call, Denny and 5 other prisoners climbed out of the building. Due to the confusion, this information was relayed to the prison almost an hour later, at 9:40 p.m. This gave the escapees a head start. Police searched nearby fields and farmland, but were unable to find any trace of the escapees. Meanwhile, riots broke out in the prison, with the remaining inmates staging a show of solidarity with Denny. Slowing down the security force's efforts, the escapees decided to set up a small camp in the nearby forest until a better option presented itself. Meanwhile, news of the escape had already made it to all Canadian media outlets and became the main story of the day. Many believed the prisoners had simply bribed the guards. The police created a special task force, whose first act was to wiretap all the phone numbers of IP members on nearby reservations and the Wolf brothers' mother. Law enforcement was quite surprised to learn that not everyone in Indian Post was happy about Denny's escape. Many young gang members considered Denny's possible appearance a threat to their authority. With the remaining money, Wolf bought fashionable clothes and went to a party where many people saw him. The catch, however, was that the plan didn't work out, and Denny was arrested in Winnipeg. In October 2009, his trial began in Rougane. Denny Wolf was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. 2 months into his sentence, Denny got into a fight involving 10 inmates, sustaining multiple stab wounds and dying at the scene. It was later revealed that Denny was not the target of the attack, but intervened to protect his cellmate, a member of the Indian posse. Richard Wolf was serving his sentence for attempted murder at the time,